topic today. I've been making more discoveries on the vineyard workers, and since it's August, it's an august time to biblically remember some Roman emperors. In fact, that's where the word comes from, and we'll look at some of that. The months in Latin, we have the different months I've mentioned before. March is month 1, so July is the 5th month, and the 6th month would then be August. Oh, it's coming up. Yeah. And here we have a verse, and evening and morning were the 6th day. In Greek it's ekti, but sextus. Sextus being 6. And so the 6th month was renamed for Emperor Augustus in 8 BC. Now some legends attribute the 31 days, the fact that Augustus wanted the same number of days as Julius Caesar with July. But that appeared in the Middle Ages, and when they tracked it down, it actually had 31 days before it got renamed. So that may not be true there. So we want to biblically remember go over what it means to remember, and then look at some emperors. In particular, Caesar, Augustus, Tiberius, and Claudius. I'll mention some of the others, but those are the 4 that are actually mentioned in the Greek New Testament. So I thought we would cover those. And since we're talking about Roman times and we need some puns, I thought I'd review the one. I came up with this in the late 80s. If you take you as a Jew, and you take offense as a offense, and you take Roman as roaming as Roman, you can get things like, would you take offense to a roaming shepherd? Would a Jew take offense to a Roman shepherd? And so we get 8 ways to say the same thing, and you can slide it all. I know some of you are not overjoyed with that, but I think it's punny. Funny, and that's the F and P sound, which are related via Grimm's law. Okay, let's go over remember. We've been talking about remember in church. Anyone remember the song by John Lennon, Remember? Verse 3, if you ever change your mind about leaving it all behind, remember today, hey, hey, and then you just go through the song. Now, our word remember comes from, through French, from Latin, rememorare, remember again, from backwards again, and memor, mindful. We get memoirs and others. So the whole idea, this is the idea of remembering. And we saw that a few weeks ago. Remember, zakar was the Hebrew word for remember, and we get Zechariah. The H at the end has to do with the Lord, as in Yahweh, Yah. And remember, Zakar, so Zechariah actually has the word remember in it. It means God will remember. So I thought that was interesting. So I looked through Zechariah. Actually, I had the computer look through. And one place in Zechariah, it says, and it shall come to pass in that day, saith the Lord of hosts, that I will cut off the names of the idols out of the land, and they shall no more be remembered, and I will cause the prophets and the unclean spirit to pass out of the land. Interestingly, in Hebrew, that remember kind of has part of his name in it, because his name means to remember. But that was the only place I found that. I thought that was interesting. Now, what does it mean to remember? Go back to Aristotle, 330 BC. He has a whole little section on remembering and recollection. He said, it is impossible to remember the future. How many people remember the future? Not talking about the movie Back to the Future. And like Yogi Bear said, it's tough to make predictions, especially about the future. And continuing, but sensation refers to what is present, expectation to what is future, and memory to what is past. All memory then implies a lapse of time. See, Aristotle makes all these observations that once you think about, yeah, that's right. Like Yogi Bear says, the future ain't what it used to be. Now, the interesting, it says expectation, right? Expectation is what is in the future. Elpis, that's the same word that is translated hope in English for the Greek New Testament. So when you have a hope in terms of the Bible, it's an expectation. And it literally, the L means had a digamma or a vel, which is like good going into German. It was a different version of Greek where they dropped that letter. And peace has to do with pistis, or persuasion, what we call faith. So literally, when you have an expectation or a hope, it's a well-founded persuasion that it's going to happen. That's what the Greek word actually means. Interesting. Now we have this, Mark Twain made some comments. Never put off till tomorrow what you can do the day after tomorrow. Right? I used to procrastinate, but I decided to go pro, right? Can you reason backwards in time? You know, today I'm doing nothing because I started doing it yesterday and I wasn't finished. Things like this get me in trouble at home. Don't give up on your dreams, go back to bed. Yeah, and we have all those. And why was the funeral for the man who invented Tupperware delayed? It took a while to find the right lid for the coffin. And while you're coughing about this joke, you're probably thinking I should put a lid on it, right? Yeah, so we have that. And we'll come back to that coffin idea. This was interesting. It just follows the next sentence or so. Aristotle, it is impossible even to think without a mental picture. The same affection is involved as thinking as in drawing a diagram. How many people have a mental picture when you think about things? Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. Whenever I do a lot of programming and I have these mental pictures of what's going on inside the computer with these different models, it allows me to move all this code around and change things because the model fits. Now, Douglas MacArthur said, will return. He means I intend to return. So when you say, I will remember, does it mean I intend to remember? I will do it tomorrow. I will remember tomorrow. Now, for Veterans Day, we said tomorrow. Do they say tomorrow we will remember these veterans? Or do they say today we remember these veterans? So when you remember, you should actually think, I'm remembering right now about the past. It's what you're doing. I will do this right now. I'm going to remember. So I thought, where does Jesus talk about remembering in the New Testament? And we had 3 places. This is the altar. Therefore, if thou bring thy gift on the altar, and there rememberest, that's to remember, that the brother, Jesus, has something against you, and that's fornication and other things that's the only places words are used in Revelation. So you remember, and that's a play on words as a groom wooing a bride, you remember that the brother has something against you. And sometimes you get all these sermons on anger management and so forth. And then it follows, the 2 things you're supposed to do. One is if the council wants you to do something Jesus doesn't want you to do, you effectively call him raka, which means you're good. Kala raka. And that's used over and over again with that play on words. And if you do what the council wants, which Rome, the power, wants, you're Roma, and you've effectively called Jesus a mora or a moron. We get the word from that. So the mora and Roma is used in many places by Jesus as a code word. And the raka and kala, you're good if you don't do what the council wants when it goes against Jesus. And if you do what the council wants, don't do what Jesus wants, you've called him a fool. Rome fool. And if you're angry with your brother, the brother, it appears not to matter as long as you don't do anything about it and you do what you're supposed to do. And so that's where you remember things. We have it in the feeding of the 5,000. Jesus said to them, do you not understand, neither remember? The Latin has recordamen, you record it. The 5 loaves of the 5,000 and how many baskets you took up? The baskets are coffinis, which is related to the Latin coffinos. That's where we get the word coffin as a basket, hamper basket. It would be a little basket, but the coffin's a little bigger. So there I said about coffin and the coffin, the Tupperware. Here we get the coffin. Are those baskets of all that bread, are they coffins? Or is it or is there more to it than just the bread? And he says, neither the 7 loaves of the 4,000, how many baskets ye took up? Spiritas. Sounds like a bird call. How many bird calls did you take up? How many baskets of money did you take up? Large basket. This is the basket Paul was put down over the wall, and the other basket is a small one. So if there are 2 different types of baskets there. He also says that, woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. That is, you're thinking something and saying something else. Ye build the tombs of the prophets and garnish the sepulchres of the righteous. And those sepulchres are taphus in Greek, but it's mnenia. It's related to the word mnemonic and remember. So a sepulcher is someplace where you remember things. Now, knowing what it means to remember, we want to now, not tomorrow, we will remember, we're going to remember now about some of the emperors from Rome and the ones that are particularly mentioned in the Greek New Testament. So I kind of put these in the order, not in the order they happen in the Bible, but the order, kind of the Caesars and so forth. We had this a few weeks ago. Tell us therefore, what thinkest thou? Is it lawful or allowed to give tribute to Caesar or not? He's talking about Julius Caesar because after Caesar was assassinated, March 15th, 44 BC, or the Ides of March, the middle of March. Lots of reasons. Essentially, one of the ideas which fits is that Caesar was trying to balance the budget, and he found had an audit done of the grain rolls, who was getting free grain, and he found out all these people were about a third of them were getting free grain, and they didn't qualify for it. And he took them off, and he got a lot of people upset because they were getting free entitlements. And so that led to the group that they didn't like him for different reasons. That was one of them, and then they assassinated him. That would never happen today if someone tries to get everyone off the handouts. But that's what happened in 44 BC. Once Caesar was dead, and evening and morning were the 5th day. In other words, the 5th month, Quintilis, was renamed for Julius Caesar. Now, after he died, or he was assassinated, there was a power struggle, and the person who became Augustus and the others, Mark Antony, they defeated the conspirators, that is Brutus and Cassius, at the Battle of Philippi, and that was in, a year or so later. 42 BC, 2 years later. So to celebrate the big victory over the conspirators who had assassinated Caesar, Augustus and Mark Antony, they celebrated by giving everyone in the city citizenship. Roman citizenship was a very big deal. So we come 100 years later, and Paul's going to talk about this because the Philippians are very proud of their citizenship, which they got 100 years later, and he's going to tell them your citizenship is in heaven. It's not here, even though you got the citizenship. So the democracy means people power. The democracy kind of ended here. We have Augustus and Mark Antony defeating the conspirators. Then we have Mark Antony and Augustus fighting to see who's going to get the power. Mark Antony goes to Egypt with Cleopatra. They end up getting defeated. So Augustus takes power and then gets his new name, Augustus, to make him sound very august and so forth. The Roman Senate never ended. They had no power over anything important. With Lenin and Stalin, they still kept the Politburo. They had no power of anything important. And Hitler kept the Reichstag. They had no power over anything important. So to extend the analogy, if the government ever becomes unimportant, we'll still have a Senate and a House. They just will be like the others. But that's just, So in Philippians 3:20, Paul tells them, for our conversation is in heaven, from whence we look for our Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ. Now that Greek word is politevma, which we get politics and other words from that. In other words, your citizenship, your belonging to the city and so forth, is of Jesus. And that meant something, that hit them a little hard because they had got their Roman citizenship free because a battle was won near there. And notice that we get all those veterans being relocated to Philippi, so they're big on law and order, like a lot of veterans, So they put Paul in jail with a Philippian jailer because all these things kind of fit together with the story. So Emperor Augustus took power. Now the emperors over time got names that were longer and longer. He only has 4 names and he added a 5th. Some have 6, 7 names. His name was Gaius Julius Caesar Octavius Augustus. They just called him Augustus usually, to his face. We don't know what they called him behind his face. Now the Augustus means majestic or venerable. He was a little bit like a scrawny little kid. He wasn't very powerful. And so he wanted a name that would make him feel a little bigger for people who hadn't actually met him. Yeah, so when we say August, that comes from that. You ever heard of Augustine of Hippo or Augustine? His name, he was a philosopher, theologian, 4th century or so. He's named for then Augustus, the same word. Now, august. Do we have any cities that are august? And the Greek word was sevastos, which meant venerable or august. And that's going to be used, Paul's going to use that, refer to Augustus in some laws. Ever heard of Sevastopol? Yeah. And there's the Ukraine, Sevastopol's on the left there. That was actually named, I think, for the one Tsarina or Catherine II, Augusta, and Polis is city like Constantinople. And so Sevastopol is the venerable or august city, is what it's named for after this Russian Tsarina. Now near there we had the charge of the Light Brigade during the Crimean War, the siege of Sevastopol. Florence Nightingale treated wounded soldiers in Constantinople. Near there, helped found the Red Cross and other things. So Sevastopol is related to that. Now, we call them august, right? Sometimes they'll use the Greek word, sometimes they'll use the Latin word that came in the Greek. Remember the story? We sang a Christmas carol this morning, right? Thinking Christmas, and it came to pass in those days there went a decree from Caesar Augustus, Caesarus Augustus. And there we have Augustus. He's mentioned there in the Christmas story. Now, later, Paul gets into trouble, or other people get into trouble. He says, I stand at Caesar's judgment seat, that's Caesarus. And second verse, at the end, he says, I appeal to Caesar. Appello, like an appellate court. There's a Latin at the bottom, appello. So he's appealing to Caesar. If you were not a Roman citizen and you got in trouble, they could do all sorts of things to you. They could lash you, they even torture you, kill you. But if you were a Roman citizen, they were supposed to go through some protocols. And so he decided to appeal to Caesar so he could talk to Caesar and appeal his case. And because he could only do that because he was actually a Roman citizen. And the people in charge were a little concerned because, I think it's here, because they had beat him and they weren't supposed to beat him if he's a Roman citizen without a trial. So we have that. He's appealing to Caesar. And some people think that the documentation required to go to Caesar was what Luke was putting together with the Gospels of Luke and then Acts. Because it's thought that appears Luke wrote those. And why did he write them? Well, part of the reason is you needed to send the documentation to Caesar for the trial. And people have noted that every place a Roman centurion or soldier or something appears, they kind of make him look not so bad. Because you don't want to do that if you're sending this documentation along. Then Festus, a little chapter later, he's saying, he conferred with the council, said, hast thou appealed unto Caesar? Unto Caesar shalt thou go. In other words, this isn't my problem anymore. I don't have to make a decision, get people mad. I'm going to send them to Caesar. But when Paul had appealed to be reserved unto the hearing of Augustus, there's Augustus Caesar with the Greek word, I commanded him to be kept till I might send him to Caesar. So Caesar appears a lot. Now, the Caesara was the Greek word that came through from Caesar, from Latin. The C was a K sound at that time. That's where we get Kaiser from, and it goes to Tsar if you change, Char and Tsar. But the C softened to a S sound in Latin, so we hear it as Caesar, like a Caesar salad, and the Caesar dog joke I had the other week, but it was actually pronounced with a hard K. That's where we get Kaiser or Kesser. Now, part of the Christmas story, Luke's trying to put the date on when Jesus was born in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar. That's the other one, Tiberius. He was the Caesar. Jesus was born with Augustus Caesar, then Tiberius took over. Now, the interesting part here is that Tiberius Caesar had a saying, and it's a number of different sayings, he said a lot. It's the duty of a good shepherd to shear his sheep, not to skin them. Because if you skin the sheep, they're not going to be able to pay taxes. So you want to get as many taxes as you can, but keep them alive so they can pay more taxes. That sound like anything as the taxes keep going up in places? Yeah. At the same time Tiberius was saying this, Jesus was walking around saying, I am the good shepherd, the kalos. He's a rakai, he's not for the council. The good shepherd giveth his life for his sheep. So there in 30 AD or so, we get two different viewpoints. The world viewpoint that you're just good for taxes, and Jesus that he's the good shepherd, he's going to give his life for you. Interesting contrast. Now we also have that, remember Caesar, we did this a few weeks ago. Whose is this image and superscription? And Jesus puts a lot of play on words like tenosi, almost the same, pronounced the same today. One is whose is, it's what sicknesses, of the image, of the house, and the you burn epitaph. He's just getting little digs in on Rome the whole way through, which a lot of people don't realize. Now, from a joke perspective, or play on words, they don't translate this, the image, or the superscription. In part because Latin didn't have a definite article, so they have to guess when the definite articles go in if you don't use the Greek. But if you look at it, see that you burn? If you leave the out, you don't get the play on words with you burn. If you leave the out with the whose, you don't get the what sicknesses. So I've started noticing a lot of why is that word in there? Oh, if we don't put the word in there, we don't get the joke. We don't get the play on words that allow us to have redundancy to find out what it really means. So if there's just a play on words going on, you don't want to make too much theologically unless you look at it closely. And he says, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's and the God what are God's. The things which are is one word in Greek, ta. And so they took ta, which is a plural for whatever it is, to be the things that are. Caesar, Caesarus, Caesari are right next to each other. He's getting a little dig on the serpents. Caesari, Caesaros, Caesari, Caesaros, Caesari. Of Caesar, and serpent and serpents, and all these serpents here. That's what Caesar is with Rome. Now, in Acts, Agabus stood up, signified by the Spirit there should be great dearth throughout the world, which came to pass in the days of Claudius Caesar. So whatever the Agabus did, this has to do with Claudius Caesar. Claudius Caesar took over after Caligula was gone. He ruled for a while, had a lot of problems with that. Claudius Caesar, they said he had trouble speaking, but he ended up being a good bureaucrat. Now, Claudius Caesar is going to be, his wife's going to have him murdered so that her son Nero can take over. Eventually, Nero will put his mother, isolate her, and then have her killed later. But he had a lot of problems. The thing is, it appears Paul appealed to Caesar when Claudius was in control. When Claudius was there, you would have got a fair shake pretty much. When Nero took over, he didn't care about anything. He probably didn't look at anything, and you were gone, so they executed Paul. Remember Nero, he persecuted the Christians, right? There was a big fire in Rome in one of the really nice areas, and he blamed the Christians and had them persecuted and executed and so forth. Now, it just so happened that those buildings, that place that burned down was in a prime real estate area, and he wanted to put his own little pleasure palace. So it just mysteriously burned down, and then he blamed the Christians. And the next emperor, it looked so bad that he turned it into like a mall, eminent domain. Well, we can't give it back to the people, but we're going to turn his little place into a place that everyone can use. But there we have Claudius mentioned. There was Aquila, born in Pontus, come from Italy, his wife Priscilla, because that Claudius had commanded all the Jews to depart from Rome. So all the Jews had to leave, and we know that Claudius did this, so it gives us a time. So we know now that that time period when Claudius did that was when this particular event happened. There are lots of times over history where Jews have had to leave. Like once Spain ended the war with the Muslims who had invaded, then they said all the Jews had to leave on a certain date. And that date was the day after Columbus sailed. So the conjecture is Columbus probably had a lot of Jews on his ship, because if you had to get out of town and there was a ship leaving, you might just sign up for it just to get out of town if you hadn't. So interesting. So Claudius did that. Finally, in Philippians, all the saints salute you, chiefly they that are of Caesar's household. Do you remember we had a thing on surprised by joy of Philippians a few years ago? And what does it mean to be surprised by joy when the word doesn't actually mean that? And what does it mean that they salute Caesar's household? Isn't that interesting? They're saluting the household. We go back and remember there are all these play on words. They're working together. Go back. For indeed he, Epaphroditus, was sick nigh unto death, but God had mercy on him, and not only on him, but on me also, lest I should have sorrow upon sorrow. What does that mean? It actually means annoyance on annoyance, but yeah. And some people say, they mention he was near death twice. And what happened with all, and they make up all these conjectures. For the work of Christ he was nigh unto death, But regarding his life, to supply your lack of service towards me. And you look at all these jokes, and Paul and Epaphroditus are talking. And Paul says, Epaphroditus, are you all right? Are you near death again? And Epaphroditus says, this is not funny, but it is so funny. I'm dying laughing. Yes, I'm near death again for the work of Christ. And Paul says, write it down. And we get to the next part. For many walk, of whom I told you often, and now tell you, even weeping, that they are the enemies of the cross of Christ. And Epaphroditus says, Paul, you're laughing so hard you're weeping. Paul says, it's not funny, but yes, I'm laughing so hard. I have tears in my eyes. I'm weeping. Epaphroditus, let's write it down. See, you got all these play on words, and they're going back and forth. And they try to take this so seriously. Oh, he was dying and all this. And it says, Caesar's household salutes you. What would you do if you were they were like under house arrest. What would you do if you were there managing the house and these guys are just making jokes all day long, and they're really bad jokes, and they say, how's this playing word? And you would be tired of them, right? Caesar's household salutes you. Good riddance. We don't need those jokes anymore. So that's just another way to look at that, instead of taking it so, they were all converted and they were sitting listening to these guys do that, and Philippians just filled with these play on words, and they work together and so forth. So to remember the past is to remember what is called history or a story. So we remembered some Roman emperors. We went through Caesar, Augustus, Tiberius, and Claudius. Caligula had a lot of problems. Nero, of course, had problems. Vespasian came in, and that's when the Jewish war ended. They started the Jewish war. The temple would get burnt down. They brought in Vespasian from from England. He eventually took over and became the emperor. The Jews thought they were doing good because they beat the third string Roman forces in Judea. When they brought the first string in, it was all over. It took a little while to finish it. They made him emperor, so he had Titus finish the job, burn down, Jerusalem, the temple burnt, the gold got put in, they had to take the stones apart. And then he only was emperor a few years, and then Domitian, his other son, took over. Some persecution started. So I'm just mentioning that because those end up in the history from 70 AD with the Jewish war. So I'm going to skip the other stuff here. So this has been a special topic, an august time in August to biblically remember some Roman emperors. Thank you. Oh,